Federal regulations dictate that conventional fuels during the summer adhere to a 9-pound limit on the Reid vapor pressure scale, which is a measure of volatility of the fuel. However, in recognition of ethanol's ability to reduce tailpipe emissions, the EPA long ago granted E10, 10% ethanol, a 1-pound waiver, meaning that E10 blends can have an RVP of up to 10 pounds in the summer. Even though positive emissions impacts of E15 are greater than E10, neither the EPA nor Congress has granted E15 a similar 1-pound waiver. As a result, refiners can send traditional 9-pound gasoline to Iowa in the summer for blending to E10, but its use to blend with E15 ethanol would violate federal rules. Therefore, by abusing this quirk in the federal fuel regulations, Big Oil leverages its fuel distribution monopoly to prevent free market competition and thwart the will of those retailers and consumers who want to use E15 in the summer. Several large retailers have stated this is the single reason they are yet to offer E15 to their customers. By not providing E15 blend stock to Iowa terminals, Big Oil can effectively control the fuel choices offered at the corner gas station in Iowa. That is a clear example of how Big Oil's fuel distribution monopoly can prevent free market competition. However, steps can be taken to lessen the power of refiners to leverage their petroleum distribution monopoly to limit consumers' fueling options. Congress or the EPA could equalize the summer RVP limits for E10 and E15. If both E10 and E15 had the same RVP limit, then the same gasoline could be blended with both, preventing Big Oil from using the regulatory quirk to limit consumer fuel choices. As a member of the United States Senate, would you support the EPA and/or congressional action to equalize vapor pressure requirements for E10 and E15, Mr. Clovis?
Yes, I think that this is a really, when you start researching the RVP, it makes no sense that we have one limit for E10 and another one for E15. It's impractical. It makes no sense to have that. Again, I would like to take the rulemaking out of the hands of the EPA because they're using the Clean Air Act as a bludgeon on these issues, and I think it ought to go resort back to Congress. Congress ought to set the limits on these issues because Congress is really the institution that should be in charge of these types of things when it comes to dealing with the overall industry that we have here, particularly when we're making law that benefits one industry over another. This is, again, part of the problem that we have with special interest. And special interest has a huge influence. Special interest influences campaigns. Special interest influences the media. Special interest has all of these other factors that are out here, and we have a 100-year establishment of oil subsidies that need to go away. And part and parcel of this, if government is really supposed to follow the Constitution and follow the Interstate Commerce Clause, which is part of the enumerated powers of Congress, then Congress ought to be doing everything they can in their power to make sure that all of the markets are available to everyone. And that means sending blender stock up here that will take E15 and waiving this or equalizing the difference between E10 and E15 and RVP. Those are very simple and very straightforward things. And yes, I would support that because again, we're advantaging oil over ethanol. And again, it goes back to the bigger picture though. What's the bigger picture? The bigger picture is a comprehensive energy policy that makes the United States energy independent. Think about what happens when we do that. And I hope we'll get to questions here where we can start talking about the individual aspects of this when we start talking about taking oil from $100 a barrel down to $60 or $70 a barrel, what the impact of that's going to be, how the trade balance in this country changes dramatically, how that shifts over to a positive aspect in GDP as opposed to a negative aspect, how that helps competition, because what happens then, we want to then preserve the resources that we have in this country, and we're going to see the demand for oil across the world increase dramatically. By the year 2030, the demand in Asia alone will be up by 36%. Those are the things we have to start anticipating here. So taking care of RVP seems something that's simple, and yes, I'd support that.
The Open Fuel Standard, OFS, is a technology-neutral bill that would require 30% of new automobiles in 2015, 50% in 2016, and 50% in each subsequent year to operate on non-petroleum fuels in addition to or instead of petroleum-based fuels. The bill allows for a full array of existing technologies, including flex fuel, natural gas, hydrogen, ethanol, methanol, biodiesel, plug-in electric drive, and the fuel cell, as well as a catch-all for new technologies. This requirement would provide certainty to investors, encouraging the production of alternative fuels and fueling stations, and to have a variety of pumps supplying those alternative fuels. Americans have routinely sent $600 billion overseas to buy oil, mostly to power our transportation economy, which is 95% dependent on gasoline and diesel fuel. The open fuel standard is an immediate and effective way to strengthen national security, lower the cost of fuel, and requires no expenditure from the federal government. Robert McFarland, and National Security Advisor to President Ronald Reagan, and James Woolsey, former director of the CIA, wrote about foreign oil dependency and the open fuel standard, noting, quote, "The solution lies in opening the transportation fuel market to competition from sources other than petroleum. But here's the rub. Although American manufacturers have stated publicly their willingness to make flex fuel vehicles up to 50% of their production, they're just not doing it. Hence the need for Congress to require that new vehicles allow the use of alternative fuels. In some corners of Washington, that raises a cry against mandates. Of course, the response to this is doing nothing is equivalent to mandating a monopoly by a single fuel whose price is set by a foreign cartel. Competition is a bedrock of our American way of life. It's time to introduce our fuel to the market," unquote. It might be worth noting that support for the open fuel standard has ranged from Iowa's own Representative Steve King to the 2012 Iowa GOP caucus winner, Rick Santorum. If elected to the U.S. Senate, would you co-sponsor and vote for the open fuel standard, Mr. Clovis?
Absolutely. I think you hit on a very important aspect of this. One is the fact that we have we import a tremendous amount of oil. Our balance of trade is skewed dramatically to the tune of about $300 billion a year to foreign oil. Any open fuel standard or any technology that we have that would allow us to find alternatives to petroleum is in the interest of the United States. This is really what Congress is about, is doing what's in the interest of the people of the United States. And therefore, because of that, Iowa will benefit from that as well. So I think the open fuel standard is something that's very important to us, and we ought to continue to press forward with that, and it takes congressional action to do that. This goes right to the heart of the issue when we start to talk about who has a monopoly and who doesn't. Big oil has a monopoly on what goes into our cars. Big oil has a monopoly on what goes into our trucks, our trains, everything else that we operate, our airplanes, everything is all based on big oil. Big oil essentially operates because of and also if you take a look at the concentration of industry they have, the small number of companies that control a massive amount of the market share, plus the fact that we have countries overseas, hostile to the United States, that essentially set the international price for oil every day. Those factors need to come into play for us to find alternatives so that the United States could be energy independent. And energy independence is really an incredibly important aspect of this. Think about what happens in the world if we become energy independent. Think about it. Think about what happens in this country if we have things like the open fuel standard, if we allow technology to advance, if we support and level the playing field by breaking the monopoly that petroleum has on our fuel industry in this country. Think about what happens to our balance of trade. Think about what happens to those countries that are hostile to us and all of the oil that they have in the ground there, that they get to keep in the ground there. Think about that. Think about what happens when the break-even price for Saudi Arabia on a barrel of oil is $100 a barrel, and think about what happens in that country if oil drops to $70 a barrel, which is what my projection is, my analysis of this is, if the United States were to become energy independent in the next 10 years. The price of oil across internationally would drop to about $70 a barrel. Think about what that translates to at the pump. That's about $3 a gallon or less at the pump, based on where we are today. if we have open fuel standards. And then that all allows us then, because of demand, lower demand for the oil, lower the cost. It's that simple. Thanks.
Cellulosic ethanol currently receives a $1 per gallon federal tax incentive. This incentive is scheduled to expire at the end of 2013. The petroleum industry, which continues to receive tax subsidies after more than a century, is the most profitable industry in the history of the world. By contrast, the cellulosic industry is just now on the brink of producing commercial volumes of ethanol. In fact, Iowa is on the front line of cellulosic ethanol, with 3 cellulosic ethanol projects scheduled to be in production in 2014 and another under development. Poet DSM in Emmitsburg, DuPont in Nevada, Quad County Corn Processors in Galva, and Fiberite Incorporated in Blairstown, Iowa. Private financing is difficult for infant industries seeking to compete with petroleum because of the massive federal policy advantages given to oil. Extending the ethanol cellulosic tax credit sends a signal to investors and lenders that the U.S. is serious about developing domestic alternatives to oil. In essence, it will help offset the federal benefits that oil continues to receive. Given this context, if elected, would you vote to extend the cellulosic ethanol tax credit, Mr. Clovis?
I think that, again, you're asking me to extend a tax credit on something and take the tax credits away from the other. But this is an area that I think is a little bit different, and I'm not going to equivocate on this because I don't believe in these tax credits in the first place. But I do think the cellulosic industry is one that is right now on the very cusp of making a breakthrough. I happen to have some experience in this. I've been over to the Nevada plant, I've been looked around there. I know the investors, I know the people that are there. I also see acres and acres and acres of product getting ready to be processed through the cellulosic plant in that area. I think one of the things that's critical here is, again, it goes back to a national energy strategy that we have to become energy independent. And then cellulosic advanced biodiesel or advanced biofuels needs to be part of that equation. And if that's the case, and it becomes part of the issue, then we take away from, again, the control or monopoly that oil has on this, and then support the issue. And Mark brought up a point early on that some of these industries are early on in their origination, and they probably need a little support or they need a little help. If this becomes part of the national energy strategy, and cellulosic biofuels becomes part of that national strategy, then it would be irresponsible of a person in Congress not to support that. If it is not part of the overall national strategy, and if it's not part of a comprehensive strategy that we have, then it would be irresponsible to support it as well. So I think what we have to do is take a look at where we are in the national strategy. 2015, when I take my oath of office as the next senator from the state of Iowa, we'll have an opportunity to sit down and evaluate exactly where we are with this. I think with this administration it's going to be difficult, but I think with the new president in 2017 and with a Republican Senate and a Republican House, I think we'll make a move very far in the direction of developing a comprehensive energy strategy for this country, of which cellulosic biofuels needs to be part of it, and I would support